Thank you for joining us once again with Heritage Mississauga for our Saturday Matinee. And this week we present part two of our series on looking at the life and times of Mississauga legends, the giants amongst us. Part one, chronologically in our presentation, delved from some of the earliest people who have recorded their times here on this landscape and the impact they had on development. And we continue that theme with some of the, for lack of a better term, the movers and shakers among those who lived in this place long before Mississauga itself took its name. First one on our story this week is that of an early Streetsville resident and maybe one of the more impactful people that settled in Streetsville. And he's known as the Commodore, Henry Rutledge. Commodore was an unofficial title, if you will. He was a member of the Loyal Orange Lodge, and they had numerous titles therein, but nonetheless, the Commodore, Henry Rutledge. The picture here is not of Henry Rutledge. It's of his son, John, who is said to have been a very similar likeness to him. There is no actual picture of Henry himself. But Henry was born in Ireland, came to Canada, settling in the Streetsville area around 1820. And became a very prolific landowner. It had a large farm to the north of Streetsville on the north side of Britannia Road, but acquired a great deal of land in the north part of Streetsville, and indeed the north part of the village was surveyed under the direction of Rutledge. He donated land for the Orange Lodge, the Anglican Church, cemetery, a school. Very, very involved in the early kind of foundation laying of the village itself. He had a lot of children. He had 18 children, 17 of which survived him, and many people in Streetsville history are connected through Henry, connected back in their genealogy to Henry Rutledge. Very colorful character. In fact, if you look at the streetscape around Streetsville, you'll find a number of road names that connect in the north part of Streetsville to the Rutledge family. Just look at the street names themselves. Whether there is a Rutledge Road, but also John Street and many others, all connecting back. Henry Street, of course, all connecting back to the Rutledge family. And again, many local connections. The Rutledges intermarried with many of those early families that settled in Streetsville and left long, strong roots for themselves within that community. So Commodore Henry Rutledge, a colorful character, but also very impactful on the life and times of early Streetsville. From there, we'll go to the story of Kakekake or Reverend Peter Jones, Chief Peter Jones of the indigenous Mississaugas. His indigenous name translates to sacred feathers or sacred waving feathers. If you want maybe one of the best books to be written on an individual connected here to historic Mississauga is by Donald Smith. It's called Sacred Feathers, and I highly recommend it. I've read the book multiple times myself, and we'll spend maybe a little bit more time in this presentation on life and times of Peter Jones. Just a remarkable individual, maybe the most impactful individual to ever reside within the bounds of historic Mississauga. And he passed away in 1856. We're dealing with someone who lived here a long time ago, but down through history, his footsteps have echoed. And again, in this humble historian's perspective, perhaps the most impactful person, in my view, to ever reside within our community. He's a difficult person to come to terms with in terms of the life and times of when he lived. He was the grandson of a Mississauga chief, but the son of a Welsh surveyor. In that sense of his own genealogy, he said that he was a man with feet in two worlds. For his early upbringing and into his early adolescent years, he was raised with his mother's people here at the Credit River in what is now Mississauga, amongst the indigenous Mississaugas. And in his early teen years, was recalled to Stony Creek by his father, Augustus Jones, the surveyor, and sent to school. He learned to read and write. He was particularly good with math and with numbers. He was his plan was to be apprenticed to be an accountant. And as such, he kind of was a hybrid between two worlds, two cultures, if you will. He found the Methodist ministry. He adopted Christianity, and he became an ordained minister within the Methodist Church, the first Indigenous Methodist minister. And then his grandfather passed away, and he inherited the role of chief of the Mississaugas. And now Peter had a path to follow, or a choice to follow, if you will, or a choice, a path before him. Which world would he embrace? Which path would he walk? That of a Christian Methodist minister and the son of a surveyor, or that of a chief of the Mississaugas? And the short answer is he chose both. And he presented a strong challenge to European officials who were not used to dealing with Indigenous peoples on terms that they understood. Here enters Peter Jones, fluent in English, a Christian minister, a man of incredible oratory skills, who understood the value of land. His father, again, a surveyor, he understood the value of money. He understood the concepts of ownership. A very kind of the perfect person at the perfect time for the challenges that were facing the Indigenous Mississaugas. He traveled internationally to the United States and overseas to England and Scotland and beyond, in part with his role as a Methodist minister and a missionary, raising funds for the Methodist Church, but also specifically for the Mississaugas themselves. It was under his kind of passion and direction, partnering with the Crown, that the Credit Mission Village was created in 1826 for the Mississaugas, really become the model community amongst, in terms of the government's eyes, at least for Indigenous peoples in the province. Became a young minister who would later make his mark in the education circles, but a young minister by the name of Egerton Ryerson got his start under the tutelage of Reverend Peter Jones, and the two men became lifelong friends. And just an exceptional individual. The book itself, Sacred Feathers, well worth a read if you have not done so. I always said every time I read it's like visiting an old friend. It is one of those things. You ever have those moments where you say, if you can go back in time and have a drink with anyone in history, or have a conversation with anyone in history, who would you pick? And there's so many of those leading figures from history and beyond that we all hear stories of. If I had to pick, it would be this individual. Just a fascinating life and times and stories, and coming to the perspective of the challenges that faced Peter Jones. Ultimately, it was, although he did meet with Queen Victoria in 1838, eliciting a promise for return of land title to the Mississaugas, that was something he never achieved. The promises ended up being empty promises. And in 1846, a conference was held to find a new home for the Mississaugas away from the Credit River, and the decision was made that they would move to what is now the New Credit Reserve south of Brantford. In 1847, Peter Jones led his people away from what is now the city of Mississauga. Incidentally, he also traveled extensively, in some cases, what many have argued might have led to his broken health. But in 1845, the picture in our top left here was taken in Scotland, and it's the oldest known photograph of a North American Indigenous person, and that was of Peter Jones from this place. Again, not an uncomplicated individual, hard choices at hard times. He did adopt Christianity. There are those that view some of the decisions made at the time with a certain level of critique, and there are others who view him as an absolute savior of his people. There's a lot of gray areas in the discussion of anyone and their impact, but Peter Jones devoutly believed he was doing the right thing. And again, I highly recommend reading Sacred Feathers, a man who did indeed walk with a foot in both worlds and shaped both of those worlds, an impactful individual who influenced the immediate world around him and those that interacted with him. Again, a man of great oratory skill as well. He basically died of broken health in 1856 at a relatively young age, with health declining, and after successive bouts of illness, he succumbed in his own home in Brantford. One of the last people to visit him in life, and indeed the person who eulogized him, was Reverend Egerton Ryerson, who would, of course, later be seen as the founder of the public education system. But Peter Jones, a very impactful individual and a giant amongst giants, if you will, of those who came from, who resided in, were connected to historic Mississauga. From there we go to Dr. Beaumont Wilson Bowen Dixie. If anyone curious about Dixie Road and where its name come from, perhaps one of the best names in local history, and I'd have to say hands down the best mustache in local history, Dr. Dixie. Was born in Wales. He received his medical license about 1843 and established his practice here in historic Mississauga. He was widely respected. He practiced a large territory. As other doctors came in, he was kind of like the second generation saddlebag doctor, if you will, at the time. He succeeded earlier doctors like Dr. Joseph Adamson, but highly educated. He was a surgeon as well as in charge of the local board of health. Really championed things like sanitation and hygiene and wastewater management and things like that. But really broadly focused on the well-being of his community, not just the patients therein. One of the sad things in Dr. Dixie's story was the loss of 4 children to a diphtheria epidemic, and it's believed that there's a good possibility Dr. Dixie brought the disease home to his own family after treating those within his community. If you visit his grave at St. Peter's Anglican Church, you'll find the large monument to Dr. Dixie himself. But then just beside that, very sadly, is the 4 little crosses to the 4 children that were lost in a very short period of time in 1853. Woolstan, Eleanor, Richard, and Willoughby were the children that were lost to the diphtheria epidemic. Out of kind of respect for their local doctor, a beloved character, even though he never lived there, he lived in the Arundel area just off of Dundas Street. Sydenham, which was ultimately known by a number of other names like Fonthill and Irishtown and Corktown over time. Sydenham was officially renamed Dixie in his honor in 1865. And that's where Dixie Road gets its name from, the former community of Dixie, named in honor of Dr. Beaumont Wilson Bowen Dixie. And there we go to Sir Melville Parker. We don't view ourselves here in historic Mississauga and indeed Canada as a place of titles, and yet here we have a Sir. He was an English baron. He inherited a baronetcy through his father. He was born in England, and the father purchased land here for his sons in 1841, and one of them was a vineyard, or had an excellent vineyard on the property, and it was under his direction that a company, they hired a number of individuals to work together to create a company known as Canadian Vine Growers Association, and it's on his property under the direction of Justin de Courtenay that the Canadian Vine Growers created Clare House Wines, the first commercial winery in Canada in the Cooksville area. Clare House Wines, under the direction of Justin de Courtenay, on property owned at one time by Sir Melville Parker. Principally, though, he's remembered as being a politician. Began a politician in as a 1858 as a local politician. Served as reeve, which is a forerunner as mayor on 3 different occasions. Retiring in 1896 after serving as a justice of the peace and county warden for over 40 years. Said to be a commanding presence, although not a military man himself, had military bearing, and people deferred to him. He was an exceptional individual from his leadership perspective, and quite well liked and admired within the community. One of the only pictures, although we have an artist rendition of him from the 1877 Peel Atlas, one of the only pictures shows the family on the porch of Clare House, and just kind of on the couch on the left hand side, just almost tucked behind the pillar. That's Sir Melville with his daughter Elizabeth and granddaughter Ida, and his son-in-law Commander Andrew Robertson, and just a remarkable early family in terms of their connections, the fact that they had this title in the leading politician of his day, and of course associated with the vineyard, well-remembered individual. And if you're driving along Dundas Street in the Cookville area, you'll find Parker Hill Road. Parker Hill led to the Parker property, and of course they're named after the Parker family, and principally that of Sir Melville Parker. From there we go to Emily Blower. One of the fascinating things is after Confederation in 1867, the Canadian federal government had to get around to kind of organizing their own internal affairs. And one of those was creating the Dominion, from the Dominion Ships Registry, a Canadian version of that known as the Canadian Shipping Registry in 1868. And people had to write in to register their vessels as Canadian vessels sailing on Canadian waters. And the very first vessel registered on the Canadian Shipping Registry in 1868 was that of the Catherine Hayes under the direction of Emily Blower. So the very first ship registered in Canada, sailing in Canadian waters, was a schooner from Port Credit under the direction of Emily Blower. Emily herself, she was born in Dixie about 1829. She married Thomas Blower of Port Credit as a sailor and a stonehooker. Relatively short life of Thomas. He died suddenly in 1867, and at that point leaving Emily with 8 young children. She must have certainly had her hands full. They couldn't keep up the house and the boat, so she moved the family onto the boat. They lived on the boat itself while plying their trade, and the trade was that of backbreaking work of the stonehooking trade, of manually hauling stone off the lake bottom onto the boat deck, and then sailing the boat into Toronto and beyond to sell the stone for building material. And there are stories told and recorded of seeing Emily being helped by her her older boys, but Emily with the skirts blowing around her in the water, helping to haul this harvest this stone in absolute backbreaking labor, hoisted onto the ship, and then just to kind of feed the mouths at the table, if you will. Her son Mark Blower became quite successful. He took over the family boat, the family stonehooking business, allowing Emily to step back. Mark built a home that stands at 58 Lake Street in Port Credit, a private family home today, and it is known that Emily lived here for a period of time towards the end of her life. But Emily Blower of Port Credit, the first woman to have a ship registered on Canadian Shipping Registry in 1868. Dr. Moses Henry Aikens of Burnhamthorpe. Burnhamthorpe was a historic village located around the intersection of Burnhamthorpe Road and Dixie, one of our lost villages, and he was the first physician to come out of this community. He was a highly educated individual, educated at Victoria College, very much focused on sanitary conditions of the home, and involved with the early vaccination campaigns. Said to be kind of an old school, dry humor, if you will, doctor who would travel far and wide to administer the needs of his patients, often not taking monetary compensation, but exchanging service for deeds down the road, if you will. One of the amazing quotes of him, just how well respected he was, and how long that he practiced, and he would often practice to generations of a family within. But the quote, "Nobody dared to die in the southern end of this county without his permission." and also voted at one point, at least informally, as the greatest son of Peel. Just a remarkable individual, and we've written about him at other times. In his estate, a bursary at UT was established in the School of Medicine, and that bursary remains active today, the Moses Henry Aikens bursary. But an individual who was quite impactful and quite beloved within his local community. And really focused on the care of the residents around him. Even in his older years, when he stepped back from his practice and his eyesight began to fail, he still would see his residents who would come to him. He would administer to their needs, and again, often serving generations of the same family, given the tenure of his practice. From there we go to Charlotte Schreiber, the noted artist. Charlotte was born in England in 1875, and together with her husband, Weymouth Schreiber, came to Canada, first settling in Toronto near Deer Park, incidentally a place that she named, and the family acquiring land out here in historic Mississauga, where the University of Toronto Mississauga campus is today. They set about establishing kind of a summer colony or a summer estate for themselves out of downtown Toronto, and the family built 3 houses. Weymouth and Charlotte built a house known as Mount Woodham, and two of Weymouth's sons from his first marriage, Herbert Harry Schreiber, built a house known as Lylehurst, and Weymouth Delisle Schreiber, the younger Weymouth, built a house known as Iver home. And so there were 3 grand family homes, summer homes here in the Arundel area of Mississauga. Of the 3, only Lylehurst survives today in a much altered state. It's believed that Mount Woodham was torn down for building material by a later owner to enlarge the Lylehurst house, and unfortunately Iver home succumbed to fire in 1913. But back to Charlotte Schreiber, a noted artist. She's the first woman elected to the Royal Canadian Academy of Artists in 1880. You will find works of her art, including probably her most famous piece, the Crappie Boy, in numerous art galleries, the Provincial Gallery, the National Art Gallery, and such. You'll even find, if you visit St. Peter's Anglican Church at Arundel, you'll find an example of her work there at St. Peter's. And she also painted a number of the interior features of the church herself, including the Nicene Creed at the altar. Just a very prolific and well-respected artist. And again, the first woman elected to the Royal Canadian Academy of Artists in 1880. She lived in this area until 1898, when her husband Weymouth passed away. Weymouth was buried at St. Peter's Anglican Cemetery at Arundel. Charlotte then later returned to England, where she lived in Bath in England before passing away. But nonetheless, a remarkably talented artist and well regarded in this community. And there we go to one that makes us chuckle a little bit, and a lot of people have had some affinity for and love the stories that have become legends. Some of the characters are, in a way, are larger than life, and a name that we probably all recognize in history. Buffalo Bill Cody does have a Mississauga connection, and some of it is true. Some of it is a little bit of an unknown, if you will. But Buffalo Bill himself was born in Iowa. So what's the Mississauga connection? His grandfather, Philip Cody, although born in the United States, came to historic Mississauga, had a land grant here very early on, set up a tavern around near the intersection of Coffin Road and Dundas Street. And that was, and his children were born here. Some of them remained in this area and married into, amongst others, the Marigold family of the Clarkson area. One of the children, Isaac, who was born in historic Mississauga, moved to the United States later in life, principally the Cleveland and Cincinnati areas, and it was he moved around quite a bit, and it was Buffalo Bill William Cody was born to Isaac in Iowa. And of course, Buffalo Bill rose to great fame as, the showman and the Wild West show, and would travel the country doing kind of this early theatrical presentation, if you will, bringing the Wild West to the rabid audiences in the urban areas of the emerging world. So became quite a famous individual. There is a plaque at Dixie Union Cemetery that commemorates Philip Cody, but also remembers that the Honorable Colonel William Buffalo Bill Cody as being baptized at Dixie Union Chapel, and that's kind of a bit of a legend. Was he baptized there? We can't say for sure. There's no record of it. It's certainly a fun story to say. We do know, we can confirm that the Buffalo Bill himself came to Canada on at least 2 occasions. Once performing, having the Wild West show performed in historic Mississauga, near where the Dixie Value Mall is today. That was a place where apparently the big top tents went up and a ring was set up and the like. But principally in the Toronto and Hamilton areas, where the show, obviously for urban areas, was put on. But he did that in 1885 and in 1897. Was interviewed by the newspaper in both times, and he talked copiously about his Canadian roots, and at one point even mentioned going to visit his relatives in the North Country. And he did indeed have relatives here. They would have been cousins at that point, but certainly there were family here that was connected to him, one of which lived in very close proximity to Dixie Union Chapel. So was he baptized there? We don't know. Might he have visited there? Quite possibly. Would he have been aware of it? Certainly he was. So you have these kind of the truths and the half-truths and the unknowns within the legend, and it leads to a great story. We can't say, even though there's a plaque on a wall that says it, we cannot say with any accuracy that he was baptized here, but he certainly would have known of it and may have even visited the chapel at times. He certainly did have family here and was well aware of his own Canadian roots. At the time, again, through his grandfather Philip and his father Isaac, who was, of course, born here. A fascinating local story. From there, we go to the Cothra family. If anyone wonders where the Cothra Road gets its name from, well, it's the family, a very prominent family that lived along its course. South of the QEW was Cothra land, and you'll still find today what we know as Lotten, Lotten, was the name of the state given by the family to the estate, and it literally is their address, Lot 10. But many refer to it today as the Cothra Elliott estate. Grace Cothra Elliott married Colonel Henry Cothra Elliott, or Henry Elliott at the time, and much to a scandal in front page newspaper at the time in Toronto Star and High Society, she refused to take his name, and they ended up hyphenating their names as Cothra Elliott, and that was due to her pride and her lacking of desire to see the Cothra name lost. So Cothra Elliott is born, and he takes her name, Colonel Henry Cothra Elliott, in 1926. They were socialites. They were wealthy in their time. They were known for lavish parties, amongst whom was the founding of the United Empire Loyalists Association of Canada, was founded on their property here in what is historic Mississauga. And the house survives today, although it's no longer open to the public. It's now used for a private school. The 1926 Cothra Elliott estate, or what was known as Lotten, survives as one of our stunning heritage landmarks here in the city of Mississauga. So the Cothra family, principally through Grace Cothra Elliott and her husband Colonel Henry Cothra Elliott, very well remembered, at least in the road name there that carries today. But the Cothra family, has even longer roots than Grace herself. The Cothra family through Joseph Cothra residing here after 1808, and setting up long roots for the family here in historic Mississauga. And there we go to TL Kennedy. Kennedy Road, Tom Ken Road, Tom Kennedy, and TL Kennedy Secondary School, all named for this individual. A commanding presence both in physical terms of the military, but also in local politics. He served in the Boer War and during the First World War, rising to the rank of colonel. He then entered politics in 1919, first representing his local constituency, and then in the provincial government at the time, serving as Minister of Agriculture, 30 to 34, 37 to 48, and 49 to 53. Nicknamed in this guise as Old Man Ontario because he promoted agricultural interests. But his home was right here in historic Mississauga in the Dixie community, just well entrenched within this community and well regarded as well. He did serve a partial term as premier when the former premier passed away in office in 1948-49. And so he did have part of a term as a premier of Ontario. And several generations of the Kennedy family and through marriage, the Chudley family were in public office and some remain in public office. But the family is well known and descendants still abound within the confines of historic Mississauga and beyond of T.L. Kennedy or Thomas and Leonard Kennedy. And from there we go to Roy Iver, better known as the Birdman of Arundel. There might be those who are listening to this who remember Roy. Some of you may have even visited Roy. If you have, we'd love to hear those stories. He was a quiet, unobtrusive individual. He operated a bird sanctuary or wildlife sanctuary, if you will, but prominently bird sanctuary just off of Mississauga Road, north of Dundas Street. It was established in 1928 and known as the Winding Lane Bird Sanctuary. The property today is a park within the city of Mississauga that has a very limited trail access, really meant as kind of a refuge and a place, a reclusive place within the city itself. But Winding Lane Bird Sanctuary and the work that Roy did really made him world famous. In his own humble way, he wrote a book called I Live with Birds. There was a National Geographic special called I Talk with Birds, and you can also find an article by I Walk with Birds. And so his work with birds and ornithology in general made him a leading expert of the field. You can find a lot of his personal reflections and memorabilia and the like are split amongst a number of organizations like the Museums in Mississauga, the Royal Ontario Museum, amongst others, all have collections pertaining to Roy Iver. And from National Geographic, a documentary that was made on his life and time, just a quote here: "He was a man who made sick birds well, the man who was often seen walking through the woods with a bald eagle, one wing crooked, hopping along at his side. Here is a man who knew a lot about nature before ecology entered the popular vocabulary, a man with a reverence for living things." He was honored from the University of Toronto with an honorary degree. They also named a number of the properties on campus after him. Just a remarkable individual who dedicated his life to the study and care of sick and injured birds. Again, Winding Lane Bird Sanctuary was quite a well-regarded facility here in historic Mississauga. And as a result of that, Roy himself was indeed a well-loved figure. And he's laid to rest at the Arundel Cosmopolitan Cemetery in behind St. Peter's Anglican Church. And fittingly, the volunteers of St. Peter's have placed a birdhouse right above his grave to commemorate the Birdman of Arundel, hence Roy Iver. For that, we'll draw to an end for part 2 of The Giants Amongst Us. There'll be others in the future as we continue the series. Hope you've enjoyed our Saturday matinee, and look forward to seeing you and chatting about local history with you down the road. Thank you.